the ceramic studio today, and I would really like to do a little experiment with making a clay form. I've been watching various videos on different ways to make molds, to use molds, different methods for hand building and building dimension. So I found this really cool technique that I had never seen before, but it really intrigued me. It's called a drop mold, and it's similar to a slump mold where you drape clay over a shape and then basically like gravity is forming it. From what I gather with a drop mold, what you do is you have like a piece of masonite or cardboard, and you're going to be cutting out the positive shape and removing it, and then you'll be left with a negative shape for you to take your clay slab and drape over it, and then it kind of like drops down into it. So what I'm going to do is I have some foam core, and I'm going to draw my design on it, and then I'll be cutting it out with an X-Acto knife and then propping it up on something so it doesn't collapse, and taking the clay and pushing it through and just seeing what happens. I have no idea. I've never done this before. But I have a couple different sizes of foam core that I'm working with. So I have this big one, I have a circular one, and then a smaller, more rectangular one that is actually a little bit stronger. So I'm kind of thinking that this will be really good for maintaining its strength. It has like, I think it's like press board, or I think it's like mat board that's been glued to the foam core. These are just scraps that we had around the studio. So I thought I would use those pieces, and then I also have some stencils that I can experiment with different shapes. I'm thinking like some really kind of curvy shapes would be interesting for building three-dimensional forms. So those are my materials so far. I'm going to use like an X-Acto blade and then cut out the shape. Ideally, it would probably be better to use like a jigsaw. I don't have access to one, but I think if I develop some forms that I like and I'd like to use again multiple times, I would probably take my stencil and then just put it on like some masonite, draw it out, and then have someone cut it for me. So I'm going to start with drawing out my design. So I'm looking at my designs now and just thinking about like which one I'm gonna cut first. So I should probably go with just the easiest one because yeah, I like to do hard things first and then I get frustrated. So I gotta rein things in a little bit. I'm just gonna start with this one. It's like the most straightforward design, and I'm just gonna take my X-Acto blade and saw through the foam core. Okay, so we've got our first shape. That only took about 5 minutes. So I think the other ones will probably, be about the same amount of time. The mat board foam core might take a little longer because it's harder. And if it's too difficult to do with an X-Acto blade, I'm just gonna put that one to the side and figure out something different or use more foam core. So I'm excited to try this out. I'm gonna go ahead and roll out my first slab of clay, and then we can see what's next. So for today's project, I'm going to be using some paper clay. It's really durable and lightweight, and it's similar to like a standard clay you would use for hand building, but it has little cellulose fibers in it, so like little bits of paper, and it's actually fairly easy to make as well. You can take like toilet paper and mix it with your clay. I just go ahead and buy mine. But I thought it would be really good for this project because I'd like to make a sculpture and I don't want it to be too heavy. So a great benefit of using this is that when it dries and fires, the little bits of paper burn out, but the clay still holds its shape and it's just a lot lighter. So I'm gonna go ahead and roll out a slab to work with. So now that we've got our slab rolled out, what I'll need to do is find a way to take my form and support it so that it doesn't collapse when the clay is on it, because the clay is going to be a bit heavier than the foam core. I don't know if I'd have the same issue if I were using like masonite, which could hold up a little bit easier. But what I've decided that I'm going to do is I'm just going to balance this on some bottles of glaze, because that's what I have, and just to kind of elevate it a little bit and then support it on top with more so that the weight can hold it down, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I want to keep my camera in one place, so that's why I'm squatting down here, in case you were curious. But I've got my clay that I just rolled out, and I'm looking at it and I think it's just going to be way too heavy for this mold, and I'm going to go ahead and just take a rolling pin, make it a little bit thinner, and smooth it out with a metal rib. Okay, so we've got our clay, and now we're just gonna try it out. So I'm gonna begin just by draping it over and then gently pushing in. I'm gonna take it really slowly because I don't want this whole thing to collapse. So I'm just going around the entire edge of my shape. I'm wondering too how soft the clay needs to be, or wet the clay needs to be. This one, I would say, it's not leather hard by any means, but since it's paper clay, it's not super moist. So I might end up adding some water to it if it just gets too stiff or it feels like it's going to rip. But so far it seems like it's pressing in pretty evenly. So it's beginning to kind of like pooch out on the bottom. Which is good, because that's what we want. It's like a big clay marshmallow. So I think I am gonna grab some water because it is starting to feel just a little dry. So it is starting to sink in there deeper now that I've added water. I think the trick here is having like the perfect balance of it being moist enough for movement, for it to form into your shape, but not too wet so that it rips. And the same goes with it being dry. If it's a little too dry, it could rip as well. So you just have to kind of find that sweet spot where it allows you to shape but doesn't get too out of control. So I just have to decide how deep I'm going to make it. I'm just kind of taking my fingers and gauging the thickness and seeing, you know, if there are any weak areas where the clay wouldn't be likely to hold or would have a tendency to crack. So I think I'm getting close to being done with this shape. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at the other side. So I'm thinking I added too much water to it. The shape is just kind of like deflating now. I think that I'm just gonna leave it alone, let it harden up a little bit. But the appearance of the clay just looked really dry to me. So I wanted to try to, fix that. But I think that I just kind of jumped the gun a little bit and I should have waited for it to be leather hard. So I'm gonna move on to the next shape and see what happens with that one. Okay, so I've just completed the second and third form, and it occurred to me what happened with that first one that had collapsed and was just sagging in a very pitiful little shape. I should have just let it hang out in the mold a little longer because it couldn't hold its form without the support of the drop mold. So I'm just letting these do that. I'm going to let them just hang out in the drop mold, harden up a little bit, and then I'll remove them. I did notice a little bit of rippage like around the edges on this last one. I think my clay is just a wee bit too wet, so I might redo this one. But I mean, that's the fun in trying something new. It's just trial and error and you see what works and what doesn't work. So I am definitely learning what doesn't work in this process, but it's all good. I'm gonna continue with that first one again and just try it over and leave it in the mold so it can properly set. Okay, so they've all set for about 30 minutes and I went ahead and popped them out of their molds and they are holding up just fine. So that's the key to doing this. You just have to be patient and wait for them to get almost leather hard. I could have probably had them sit for a little bit longer, but the idea is now I take more clay and do another run, and then after those are ready, then I can cut them out and put the two sides together and have like a little pillow form. So, do you want to see what they look like? So that about does it for today. Thanks for coming along and trying this out with me. It's always fun to do different projects and experiments in the studio. I'm excited about this one because I've got some ideas brewing for some future pieces that may incorporate a drop mold within, say, a slab. Maybe it'll have certain elements of the piece that will kind of pop out. Maybe, you know, there's like a little man and his pot belly's sticking out or something. But also I've got some sculpture ideas to work with. So yeah, so moving forward, this will definitely be a process that I can incorporate in some of my work. And I hope that you can too. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Any tips if you're experienced in drop molding. And thanks so much for watching, and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.